off-campus housing. A lot of college students take advantage of it. The houses are near the campus, you're not exactly living in the dorms if that's not your thing, and you can live with roommates and juggle studies and work pretty easily. Well, that was exactly what 21-year-old Andrea DelVesco was doing. She was in her final year of college and was on the cusp of starting her new life after college. But when a fire broke out in the unit she was living in, everyone thought that it was just a freak accident. But things weren't what they seemed, and the investigation uncovered some terrifying revelations as the layers of mystery unraveled. The tragic case of Andrea DelVesco involves hunting down the perpetrator with the help of speakers, a red Snuggie blanket, and a bloody trail of evidence, topped with police and media blunders. The true crime story of Andrea DelVesco is unlike any case we've ever covered before, and this is going to be a wild one. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts. We just recently hit 100,000 subscribers, so I've got to ask, if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Anyway, if you like old-fashioned true crime documentaries, I post new cases every single week, so be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. It's completely free, and it just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. Andrea Lauren DelVesco, better known as Andy, was born on June 29, 1994, in Chicago, Illinois, to her parents Leslie and Arthur DelVesco. She had an older brother, James, and a younger sister named Alexis. Andy was also very close with her parents, and the family moved to Austin, Texas to settle down permanently. Andy and James were very close in age and had the same friend group, whereas Alexis looked up to Andy a lot. For Alexis, Andy was her role model, and she always wanted to be just like her big sister. Andy loved her family and friends and would spend time satisfying her curiosity by going on adventures, listening to music, and she loved admiring art and photography. Andy graduated high school in 2012, and during her teen years, she found out that she loved playing sports, and during her time in school, she was part of the hockey and the lacrosse teams. She was also a National Commended Merit Scholar and won numerous awards for her achievements in school, specifically in Latin and English and Spanish, while attending St. Andrew's Episcopal School. Because of this, Andy decided to enroll at UCLA in the fall of 2012, and she went to do a double major in psychology and Spanish. She also loved animals. And aside from her family dog, Jewel, that the DelVescos adored, Andy spent her 16th birthday in Peru, where she built homes for guinea pigs. You literally can't make this stuff up. If this doesn't explain the type of person that Andy was, I don't know what will. As soon as Andy started college, though, she joined the sorority Pi Beta Phi, and here she finally met a group of like-minded girls that she really latched onto. According to her sorority sisters, Andy was the mature big sister. She was the type of person to give genuine advice to her friends, help others out with their studies, and everything else in between. Now, everyone in college has a bit of fun, and said fun can lead to run-ins with the law. And unfortunately for Andy, she faced the same thing. On July 8th of 2015, she was arraigned on charges of possessing illegal party supplies. I've got to be careful with my language here, or the YouTube police will come out of the woodwork, but I hope you get the implications here. These were not charges to be taken lightly. These were felony charges that, for some people, get them locked away for years. Andy pleaded not guilty, and she was released and was due back in court in a couple of days to set up a hearing date. Now, even though Andy was very responsible in college, it's not uncommon at all for people of this age to make some pretty rough mistakes, this being Andy's biggest one. But if we're being honest with each other, I think most of us have probably found ourselves at a similar situation at some point or another, maybe not with impending felony charges, but we've all done some dumb stuff. But Andy being Andy, she didn't want this roadblock to be in the way of her final year at UCLA. In 2015, Andy and her sorority sisters Abby, Samantha, and Jessica moved into an off-campus apartment that was just 4 minutes away from campus. Andy was loving her time there, but something was still missing. Given her love for animals, it was impossible for Andy to not have a furry companion at college, too. So in early February of 2015, Andy adopted a Chihuahua Terrier mix rescue dog that she named Shay Panda. To say that the new addition to the sorority family was exciting, that would be an understatement. All of the roommates were in love with Shay. By all accounts, at this point, Andy was having the time of her life. But everything came crashing down on September 20th of 2015. And the devastating events of what happened on that fateful day well, they changed the lives of her friends and family forever. September 20th, 2015 was a normal day in Andy's off-campus apartment. She and her friends were prepping for a busy week ahead and were making banners, flyers, and decorations for welcoming new sorority sisters for the year. The apartment was littered with colorful paper, scissors, glue, and glitter, and for Andy, nothing sounded more perfect than cozying up on the couch and getting work done for the upcoming rush week. Andy was also accompanied by Shay, their dog, and they spent the day like normal. When nighttime rolled around, Abby was the first to go home at around 10:20 p.m. from work. She went to bed at around 1:30 a.m., and then at 3:15 a.m., Jessica and Andy also decided to call it a night, with Jessica heading off to her bedroom and Andy snoozing on the sofa with her red Snuggie blanket. Upstairs lived another sorority sister, Sarah Murr, and she had just come back after dropping her boyfriend off at the airport. Sarah arrived home at 5:35 a.m., and as she was walking up to her front door, she felt someone behind her. When she spun around, she saw a Hispanic man, donned in a red and blue tank top, dark jeans, and a baseball hat, standing still like a statue. After a stare-off that felt like hours for Sarah, the man was obviously caught red-handed and he made a run for it, allowing Sarah to shut the front door and lock it securely. Shaken up a bit by the weird occurrence, Sarah contemplated calling the police, but after talking to her boyfriend on the phone and realizing that the man was gone and wasn't a danger, Sarah decided to just get some shut-eye instead. Fast forward to 5:50 a.m., just 15 minutes later. Samantha left for work early in the morning and saw Andy sleeping on the couch before she walked out the front door. 10 minutes later, though, Abby, who was sleeping at that time, woke up to the sound of a shrill scream and the barking of a dog, but she went back to sleep, not thinking too much of it, likely assuming Shay and one of the sorority sisters were just playing around. But Sarah, the upstairs neighbor, who also woke up from the scream, decided to call 911 at 6:15 a.m. Not long after, 4 officers were dispatched to the location, 10954 Roebling Avenue. They scoped the area, shining lights in the windows, but finding nothing out of the ordinary. The whole neighborhood was silent, and the officers, without even knocking on the doors or trying to search inside the house, decided it was probably nothing, so they just left. Sarah was understandably uncomfortable with how the officers handled the situation, but she couldn't do anything but try to relax. But she didn't do that for long, because at 7 a.m., she woke up to another sound, which was a loud bang. When Sarah went to her balcony, she saw a man wrapped in a red blanket jumping over the railing that led to Andy's balcony. Sarah also noticed something much more alarming, and that was the fact that thick gray smoke was billowing out of the windows, combined with a faint amber glow flickering through the haze. The house was on fire. Acting on instinct, Sarah ran after the man, yelling at him to stop. The man managed to get away, but not before Sarah saw him getting into the passenger seat of a red Nissan with another man in the driver's seat. She immediately recognized the man as the same guy that she had seen near the front door a couple hours prior. She also saw a Lambda Chi Alpha sticker on the rear window of the car. Sarah immediately jumped into action and called 911 again, this time alerting them to a fire in the house. Meanwhile, the commotion and Sarah's yelling woke Samantha, and she went over to check on her roommates, but she was stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the smoke coming out of Andy's closed bedroom door. Samantha, not knowing what to do, opened the door and saw the horrific scene of Andy's entire bedroom engulfed in flames. Samantha took off in a sprint and woke up her other roommates, and everyone made it out safely, except for Andy. Firefighters immediately swarmed the place and extinguished the flames as the rest of the women were scared and crying for Andy on the sidewalk, praying that she was okay. After the place was cleared, the police raided the apartment and dashed into Andy's room, from where the fire had started. Unfortunately, Andy couldn't be saved. Police officers discovered her lying on her bed, and she'd clearly been there throughout the entire duration of the fire. What was weird was that a trash can was also on the bed, and detectives had suspicions that this trash can may have been used to start the fire. But as the investigators looked further, they were horrified to see a massive pool of blood on the bottom and the side of the bed. As the investigators were trying to make sense of what had happened, a sound broke them out of their thoughts. It was a whimpering sound. Covered in black soot just feet away from Andy's body was Shay Panda, Andy's beloved pup. Shay was very badly injured, and because Andy's door was closed, she had no way of escaping. She was immediately snatched up and taken to a vet to be treated for her injuries. Now, the door to Andy's room being closed was an alarming sign. Andy never slept with the door closed because she knew that Shay would want to get up and wander around at night. So, who closed it? By now, Andy's body was taken in for an autopsy, and the results, well, they were horrifying. They painted a completely different picture than what the police and others had expected. Andy had no smoke in her lungs, indicating that she unfortunately was not alive at the time that her room and body were set ablaze. Upon further examination, it was found that Andy had been jabbed a total of 19 times and had fatal wounds to her neck, but she had clearly fought till her last breath, and the defensive wounds on her body and the evidence smeared all over her bed were a clear indication of that. Police were now having to shift gears because what they thought may have been a simple, albeit strange fire, was now a homicide investigation. The investigators immediately launched an investigation to find Andy's killer, and luckily they had a solid lead: the mysterious man who had fled the house as witnessed by Sarah. But even though the detectives knew that the man was responsible, the bigger challenge was to find out who he was. Meanwhile, the investigators were tasked with breaking this grueling news to Andy's family, and when they heard of Andy's passing, the DelVesco family, they felt a piece of them die forever. Their independent, loving, and sincere Andy was gone. It was a shot straight to their hearts, and it seemed that misfortune, grief, and tragedy had woven their way into the DelVesco family without even a moment's notice. When they heard of Andy's dog, Shay, hovering between life and death, the DelVesco family immediately left for Los Angeles to be with Andy's beloved puppy. For Shay, unfortunately, things weren't looking good. She was barely breathing, and her chances of making a recovery were next to zero. The doctors were not very hopeful, and this news shattered the DelVesco family's already bruised hearts. To add insult to injury, the media was also spinning nonsensical tales relating to Andy's passing, and their main focus was none other than Andy's pending drug charges. Newspapers and electronic media didn't hesitate to frame Andy's passing as something drug-related, and this was devastating for Andy's family to see. The thing is, everyone makes mistakes, and Andy did too. But spinning a story of Andy's murder being a gang deal gone wrong without any proof was a new level of low, even for the media. Andy was in no way, shape, or form a dealer of any kind, nor was she making any profit from this. She was literally just a young woman who was trying to have fun in college. Now, while this type of fun may be highly illegal and certainly unethical for some, she was just a kid. But fast forward to September 21st of 2015, and 3 men came forward about a peculiar robbery that occurred on the same night that Andy was attacked. These men, also UCLA students, lived across the street from Andy. In the aftermath of a small party they'd thrown, they noticed a laptop, car keys, and Sonos speakers missing. The men also checked the car, whose keys had been stolen, by using a spare key, and they found that it had been ransacked. The investigators had an inkling that there may be a link between this robbery and Andy's attack, so they looked into it. And what came to their aid were the very Sonos speakers that had gone missing. See, Sonos speakers require online registration before using them, so the buyer has to put in all of their info like their name, email, Wi-Fi, etc. before they can even use them. So the detectives, they had a serious lead. They checked who had registered the speakers, and soon enough, a name popped up. The speakers had been registered to a man named Joseph, who was a student at Fresno State University. Joseph was immediately questioned by the police, and he was genuinely confused and frightened. Yes, the speakers were his, but he confessed that his roommate, Alberto Medina, had brought them back from his recent trip to LA. The investigators were immediately alert at the mention of Alberto and his trip to LA, as it was obviously the same place where Andy lost her life. So they knew that they had to talk to this Alberto guy. The police found that Alberto was in LA at the same time of Andy's attack. He was also known to have been at a friend's house in Westwood, a few minutes away from Andy's off-campus apartment. Alberto Medina was 22 years old at the time of the case, and he attended Fresno State University, where he was studying psychology and social work. He was the first in the Medina family to attend college, and his family was very proud of him. But their excitement would be very short-lived. Alberto was part of the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity in 2014, but he was quickly kicked out by his brothers for misconduct. According to many female students at Fresno State, Alberto was also a creep. If that wasn't alarming enough, Alberto also drove a dark red Nissan, just like the one seen on the night of Andy's death. Another of Alberto's roommates, also named Joseph, spoke to the police, and he said that Alberto wouldn't stop talking about Andy's case once it popped up in the news. Believe it or not, he actually praised the killer for being smart enough to light the trash can on fire to, quote, get rid of all evidence. Alberto also bragged that Andy's brutal murder might have been sexually motivated. Joseph was disturbed by Alberto's intense interest in such a brutal and heartbreaking case, so he decided to approach the police as something just felt odd about the whole situation. Well, Joseph's conversation with detectives turned out to be the downfall of Alberto, as on September 26th, Alberto Medina was arrested, initially on charges of robbery, and he was taken to the Fresno police station for an interview. He was very arrogant and stoic throughout the questioning, and didn't even flinch when he heard Andy's name. Alberto did confess that he went to LA to meet his high school friend Eric Marquez, but the duo supposedly spent the night partying and going to a concert. Alberto, being the amazing friend he is, then tried to dump all the blame on Eric and told detectives that he was the one who brought the speakers back to Fresno. But when the investigators did some digging, it turned out that Alberto returned to Fresno alone on September 21st, so this was obviously a lie. As more details came out, the police found that Alberto and Eric were actually at a house party on the evening that Andy lost her life. And get this, where's the address to the party located? Right across the street from Andy. As it would turn out, Alberto had stolen the laptop, keys, and speakers as revenge after some of the partiers made jokes about him. Well, when the investigators asked Alberto about Andy, he took this as a sign to throw Eric under the bus yet again. He went on to say that Eric had been the one to attack Andy. But this ruse was shut down quickly too, when a full-body examination was done on both men. Eric had no bruises, scratches, or any injuries on him, but Alberto did. He had bruises and scratches on his arms, head, torso, and knees. Also, the detectives searched Alberto's apartment, and inside his closet, they recovered a red Snuggie, a woman's undergarments, a blood-soaked Nike tank top, and the murder weapon, a bloody kitchen knife, all inside of a black trash bag. When the blood was tested, it was a match to Andy's. So the answer was clear as day. Thanks to Sarah's alertness, her witness testimony, and the evidence found in Alberto's apartment, he was going to stand trial and face the consequences for what he had done. According to the prosecution, Alberto was with some friends and girls partying on the fateful night of September 21st. But when the group got into an Uber to go home, Alberto tried to make advances on one of the girls, but was unsuccessful, and the guys were dropped off first at Eric's apartment. Then the men left the apartment once again at 4:34 a.m. and headed to the Roebling Avenue house for a party, the house which was right across the street from Andy's. But minutes later, they were seen running out of the house with the stolen items, heading towards their red Nissan. Shortly before 5 a.m., a man named Julio was out picking tin cans for recycling when he saw Eric and Alberto in a car laughing loudly, seemingly drunk. The men approached Julio, and Alberto asked him if he knew how to fight, because he, quote, was about to go into a woman's apartment and wasn't sure if there would be any men there. Confused, Julio just left. This was around the time that Alberto was spotted creepily standing near Andy's house's front door. Between 5:50 and 6 a.m., Andy woke up and scooped up Shay and her blanket to go to their bedroom, and it's believed that during this time, Alberto set his sights on her. According to the prosecution, Alberto was angry since he'd been turned down by a woman earlier that night, but now he wasn't going to let this one slip away. To make matters worse, the French doors leading to Andy's bedroom didn't shut properly, so it was the perfect way for Alberto to sneak into her bedroom, and that's exactly what he did. It's believed that Alberto attacked Andy with a kitchen knife taken from the kitchen of their home and ended her life after an intense struggle between the two, causing Sarah to call 911 as we mentioned towards the beginning of the case. What was so appalling and scary was that Alberto was still in Andy's bedroom while the investigators arrived and scoped out the area at about 6:23 a.m. The thing that doesn't make sense to me, though, is that, as we discussed a moment ago, when the police first showed up, they didn't even bother knocking on any doors or windows or doing anything, really anything at all. They just poked around and left. Had they at least knocked on the front door, or even gone a step further and looked around inside the house, well, Alberto could have been caught much sooner, and depending on the timeline, doing so may have even saved Andy's life. After the police left, it's believed that Alberto set fire to the trash can between 6:45 and 7 a.m. and left it on the bed and fled the house. And Andy's fate had now been sealed. On May 29, 2018, 3 years after Andy's tragic and sudden passing, Alberto Medina was found guilty of first-degree murder, first-degree arson, 2 counts of robbery, and 1 count of animal cruelty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric, on the other hand, was only charged with robbery and accessory after the fact, and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison since there wasn't any solid evidence to tie Eric to Andy's passing. And as far as we know, he didn't have much of a hand in Andy's passing if he played any role whatsoever. But just when you think that this case couldn't get any worse, it does. Shay, Andy's beloved dog, had to be set free from this world. She had a great number of injuries, many of which were much worse than they initially seemed, and the DelVesco family knew that it was best to let her go and reunite with Andy. To say that this loss was heavy on Andy's family is an understatement. Shay was the only memory left of Andy, and it turns out, according to the evidence found at the scene of the crime, Shay never left Andy's side, either during or after the attack. Alberto's attack on Andy seemed to be random, and it could have been anyone that night. But after the preliminary hearing, one of Andy's roommates, Jessica, recognized Alberto as the man who had approached Andy and some other girls while on a walk with Shay a few months prior. Alberto had a brief chit-chat with them, and Andy even proceeded to tell them where she lived, but she had no idea that this fact may one day lead to her own demise. After all, at that time, Alberto seemed like a perfectly normal guy. But this leads to one major question. Did Alberto randomly pick Andy as his victim on that fateful night? Or was it premeditated? The truth is, we'll probably never know. As for the police, the 2 officers, Rodell Seduth and Alicia Williams, who initially responded to the call made by Sarah, well, they were fired from the police force on November 4th of 2016, and thank God for that. The DelVesco family can't help but blame these 2 specific officers for their lack of handling the situation better. You can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the circumstances could have been different if they'd actually investigated the residents as they were supposed to. Even if Andy was already gone by the time the detectives first arrived, at least Alberto could have been arrested and punished quickly. But that didn't happen. At the end of it all, Andy's family and friends have to go on with their lives without the bubbly, generous, and loving presence of Andy, an irreplaceable, warm, and vibrant young girl with so much to offer. The only consolation for Andy's family is knowing that Andy, well, she didn't die alone. Little Shay, even in the face of death, she never left her side.